The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, painting the tarmac in shades of gold and orange. Flight 482, a Boeing 737, was scheduled for a routine domestic journey, carrying 162 passengers and 6 crew members from Seattle to Denver. Among them, no one paid much attention to the woman sitting quietly in 1-4 headphones over her ears, a paperback novel resting on her lap. She was average-looking, the kind of person you might overlook in a crowd, yet there was a certain precision in her posture. The way her eyes scanned the cabin, as if calculating angles and distances without even realizing it. Her name was Claire Donovan, a retired fighter pilot who had spent a decade maneuvering some of the most advanced jets in the world. That part of her life was a closed chapter. After a painful accident had grounded her permanently, she had traded the roar of supersonic engines for the hum of commercial airliners. Content to live anonymously among the masses. Nobody in the cabin suspected her past, not the chatty young couple in 14A and 14B, not the mother soothing her crying toddler in 14D, not even the crew hustling down the aisles serving coffee and muffins. Claire blended seamlessly into the ordinary, an invisible hero in plain sight, as the plane taxied down the runway. A familiar mix of excitement and nerves buzzed through the passengers. The bowing lifted smoothly, the engines vibrating beneath them as the aircraft climbed into the clear morning sky. For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. People flipped through magazines, scrolled on phones, or dozed against the windows. The rhythmic drone of the engines, a comforting white noise. But at 35,000 feet, the ordinary shattered. It started with a subtle shudder, a vibration that was unusual for a Boeing 737 in cruise. The pilot's voice, calm, yet tense, came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The plane's wings shivered again, more violently this time, and the overhead lights flickered. Claire's head snapped up, instincts kicking in without conscious thought. She didn't look around. She didn't ask questions. She just felt it. Minutes later, the flight attendants moved toward the cockpit, their faces pale. Something was wrong. Something catastrophic. From the passenger's perspective, it was chaos in slow motion. Phones were out, hands clutched tightly to armrests, and the anxious whispers of strangers filled the cabin like a rising tide. But Claire, seated quietly amid the panic, calculated trajectories, engine thrust ratios, and emergency response times with a precision that made her stomach tighten. The plane lurched violently. The engines emitted a high-pitched whine that escalated into a deafening roar. The captain's voice came over again, strained this time. "Mayday, we are losing engine power. Attempting emergency landing." The words barely made sense before the communication was cut off abruptly. Static filled the intercom. Panic erupted fully now. People were screaming, crying, and reaching for oxygen masks that hadn't yet deployed. The Boeing 737, a marvel of engineering, had become a metal coffin hurtling through thin air. Claire's mind went into overdrive. Every muscle she possessed, every ounce of training from her years as a fighter pilot, surged back to life. She didn't hesitate. She stood, securing herself against the trembling aisle, and moved toward the cockpit. The flight attendants tried to stop her, but she reassured them with a calm authority that brooked no argument. "Step aside. I know what I'm doing." The cockpit door was jammed. Likely from the violent vibrations, she grabbed a fire extinguisher as leverage, using her strength and knowledge of aircraft mechanics to pry it open. Inside, the pilots were struggling. Sweat poured down their faces, and one of them, the co-pilot, was trying desperately to stabilize the controls with shaking hands. The captain's eyes widened as Claire entered, a mixture of disbelief and hope. "I used to fly fighters," she said succinctly, without arrogance, without embellishment. "I know how to handle a plane in this condition. Step back and trust me." The captain hesitated but then nodded. There was no time for debate. Claire gripped the yoke, her fingers moving with precise confidence, her mind mapping out emergency landing procedures in real time. The engines were failing, one completely dead, the other sputtering unpredictably. She initiated a controlled descent, maneuvering the heavy jet with the finesse of someone half her age, calculating every angle to avoid a nosedive, every adjustment critical to keeping the fuselage intact. In the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with terror and disbelief. Some passengers prayed, some wept silently, and others whispered frantic goodbyes into phones they knew had no signal. But amid the chaos, Claire's presence was a quiet force. A few nearby passengers noticed her calm movements as she communicated with the pilots, issuing commands, adjusting controls, and assessing fuel pressure. There was a silent recognition, a gut feeling that this woman, ordinary in appearance but extraordinary in capability, was their last hope. Claire pushed the 737 toward the nearest airport, a regional strip barely equipped for a commercial jet. The instruments flashed warnings, the engines screamed, and turbulence rattled the plane like a box of fragile glass. Every second stretched into eternity. But Claire's experience with split-second decision-making, with aircraft that could twist and spin at hypersonic speeds, allowed her to adapt. She calculated wind resistance, glide paths, and the minimal runway length required, adjusting the plane's descent with surgical precision. Minutes felt like hours. The plane was now in a steep dive, alarms blaring in the cockpit. Claire's mind was a blur of protocols, memories of ejection sequences, emergency landings, and maneuvers she hadn't practiced in years. She felt the strain in her arms, the sweat beading on her forehead, the burning in her legs from bracing against the controls. And then, through the storm of noise and panic, she caught a glimpse of the runway lights far below, a narrow ribbon of salvation. Her heart pounded, but there was no room for fear. She guided the plane down, lining it with the runway like a marksman aiming for the smallest target. The 737 touched down hard, the landing gear shuddering under the stress, sparks flying as the tires gripped the asphalt. The engines groaned, but the plane remained intact, skidding toward a halt in a controlled chaos that made the passengers' stomachs flip. When the wheels finally stopped, a stunned silence enveloped the cabin before it erupted into relieved sobs, cheers, and cries of gratitude. Claire sank back in her seat, exhausted beyond belief. But her relief was quiet. Around her, passengers hugged each other, shaken but alive. Flight attendants were busy checking on everyone, their eyes wide as they realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The captain, pale and trembling, turned toward her, gratitude and awe mixing on his face. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. Nobody could have done what you just did." Claire simply nodded, brushing back her hair and muttering, "Just did what needed to be done." She didn't speak of her past, didn't offer the details of her fighter pilot career, because at that moment, it didn't matter. She had returned to the sky for one final mission, and she had saved every life aboard Flight 482. Outside the plane, emergency vehicles swarmed the tarmac, lights flashing and sirens wailing. News helicopters hovered above, capturing the aftermath. The story of a quiet woman who appeared ordinary, yet performed an extraordinary act of heroism, was about to go viral. But inside, Claire remained almost invisible, just another passenger catching her breath, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from her veins, and knowing that she had once again faced death in a machine. She understood better than anyone else. No one had known her secret until now. Nobody had imagined that the calm woman in 14C had once flown fighter jets faster than sound, battling impossible odds with nerves of steel. And in that moment, as the Boeing 737 rested safely on the runway, that secret, the life of skill, discipline, and courage revealed itself not through words, but through action. News of the miraculous landing spread faster than wildfire. Within hours, major networks and social media feeds were ablaze with images of Flight 482, of terrified passengers emerging from the aircraft, and of one quiet woman who had stepped into the cockpit and somehow saved them all. Reporters swarmed the airport like a storm, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. And yet Claire remained calm, almost eerily composed. She walked past them without a word, slipping into the anonymity she had cherished for years. But the veil of invisibility that had defined her life was breaking. By the afternoon, the story had gone viral. Hashtags praising her courage trended worldwide, and news channels began digging into her background. That's when the truth came out. Claire Donovan, the unassuming woman in seat 14C, was a former fighter pilot decorated for valor in missions that had been classified for decades. Images of her in a flight suit, soaring above deserts and oceans in sleek fighter jets, began circulating. People were stunned. No one had expected such a quiet, middle-aged woman to have once maneuvered some of the most lethal machines in the sky. Meanwhile, passengers were still in shock, processing what had happened. Families hugged tightly, children clung to parents, and strangers who had spent just a few hours together on that plane exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. Among them, some noticed her subtle gestures, the calm nods, the precise instructions she had given during turbulence, the unwavering focus that had somehow steered them from certain disaster. They began sharing stories of their brief encounters with her, of her quiet bravery and commanding presence. Claire herself stayed largely out of the spotlight. She refused interviews, declined awards initially, and even turned down offers to speak on live television. She had never sought recognition. For her, the act of saving Flight 482 was not a statement of heroism, but a duty, an instinct honed over years of flying aircraft that didn't forgive mistakes. Yet, the world was insistent. Reporters followed her home. Neighbors recognized her from viral photos, and even the local coffee shop where she used to sip her morning latte had become a hub of media attention. As the days passed, the narrative around her heroism evolved. Psychologists and aviation experts analyzed her actions, marveling at the calm decisiveness with which she had taken control of a failing Boeing 737. Flight instructors cited her as a masterclass in emergency handling. Passengers recounted the terrifying moments, their voices shaking, describing how she had navigated the plane with a combination of instinct, experience, and a level-headedness that defied the chaos around her. The world watched, enraptured, as the story of the fighter pilot turned anonymous passenger unfolded. Despite the global attention, Claire's life quietly began to shift. She couldn't ignore the whispers of awe, the letters from children who called her their real-life superhero, or the emails from veterans acknowledging her bravery and thanking her for continuing to serve in a new, unexpected way. For someone who had lived years in a world of secrecy and discipline, the sudden wave of recognition was unsettling, but strangely comforting. She had spent so long hiding her skills, her courage, and her history. But now, for the first time, they were celebrated not for notoriety, not for medals, but because lives had depended on them. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip behind the mountains, Claire's phone buzzed with a single message, a short video from the captain of Flight 482. In it, he spoke with a raw sincerity that no media script could capture. "Claire, every time I think back to that moment, I still can't believe what you did. I don't know if we'll ever meet a pilot like you again. Thank you for saving us all." Claire watched it silently, a lump forming in her throat. For years, she had lived with the memory of missions that no one could ever know about. Moments that had tested her body and spirit. And now, a single act on a plane she had boarded as a passenger had finally bridged the gap between her past and present. Her friends and family began noticing subtle changes in her demeanor. There was a lighter step in her walk, a softer tone in her voice. Claire had always carried the weight of her past silently, as if it were a secret too dangerous to reveal. But the world's recognition, the gratitude of those whose lives she had directly saved, allowed her a rare freedom to breathe without the constant shadow of secrecy, to acknowledge her courage without fear of misunderstanding or judgment. Even the airline became a part of her story. Investigators and engineers pored over the black box, seeking to understand exactly what had gone wrong with the Boeing 737. Flight attendants testified about her composure, her instructions, and her decisive actions in moments when others panicked. The airline initially focused solely on the technical failure, found itself embroiled in celebrating human skill and courage. Claire's name was mentioned in press releases, safety briefings, and pilot training sessions. She had become not just a hero, but a symbol, a reminder of the extraordinary potential lying dormant in ordinary lives. But fame, as it often does, was complicated. Media outlets wanted interviews, sponsorships, and headlines. Some journalists sensationalized the story, painting her as a mystery fighter pilot or the woman who outflew death. Claire navigated it with the same poise she had shown in the cockpit. Graceful, precise, and deliberate. She gave only what she chose to share, protecting the private parts of her life while allowing the public a glimpse of the person who had quietly saved a plane full of strangers. Then came the letters, hundreds of them, from parents, veterans, young students, and even retired pilots who had never met her. They spoke of inspiration, of hope, of a desire to emulate the courage she had displayed. One letter, in particular, stood out. A child who wrote, "I want to be brave like you. I want to help people when they need it most. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like." Claire kept that letter pinned above her desk, a tangible reminder that heroism is not always loud, but it is always remembered. In time, she returned to a semblance of normal life. She continued flying, though only for personal trips now, relishing the quiet hum of engines she knew intimately. Occasionally, she would smile at the headlines, scroll through the tributes online, or quietly nod when someone recognized her in public. Yet, despite all the acclaim, her sense of self remained grounded. Claire Donovan was still the same woman who had quietly chosen to sit in 1-4C that morning, not seeking fame, but seeking peace in the clouds and finding herself thrust back into the sky for one last mission. The world knew her story now, and yet, she had not changed. She still walked calmly through life, observing, listening, and calculating the world around her with the precision that had once guided her in fighter jets. And for those who had been on Flight 482, she became something more than a hero. She was a guardian angel in plain sight, a living testament to the power of experience, courage, and quiet determination. Years later, when recounting the incident to close friends, Claire would shrug and say, "I just did what anyone with training would do." But those who truly understood engineers, passengers who had lived through those terrifying minutes, knew better. They understood that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform, doesn't always announce itself, and doesn't always seek applause. Sometimes, heroism is quiet, seated among ordinary people, waiting for the moment the world needs it most. And in that moment, seated in 1-4C, Claire Donovan became more than a retired fighter pilot. She became the woman who reminded everyone that courage, skill, and humanity can converge in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes saving lives isn't about recognition, medals, or glory. It's about showing up, taking control, and flying straight into the storm when everyone else fears to move.